Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 6 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by my colleague, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Can't complain. I'm the proud owner of a lava lamp now, so that's sat over there, and that's giving me great enjoyment.
I once invented a lager lamp. I discovered that if you drop cherry tomatoes into lager, they kind of rise to the top and then sink down to the bottom again, and they just keep doing it. And if you put a candle behind, it looks fantastic. I wasn't thinking I was going to go there this morning on the podcast, but there we are.
I don't think that's marketable. I don't think you could sell that.
No, but it's something you can try. You know, next time you're at a buffet in a pub and there's cherry tomatoes available. So, yeah. Anyway, we're not here to talk about lager lamps or lava lamps. We're joined this morning by guest fellow AWS community builder Martyn Kilbryde. Martyn, you've been on the podcast before. You obviously enjoyed it, so welcome back. How are you doing today, Martyn?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. I think you should start selling these lager lamps now.
Lager lamps, yeah. I'm gonna have to revisit the lager lamp. And,
is the beer going to get in the tomato, or is it a buoyancy thing, or is it a surface tension?
Well, the bubbles kind of build up around the gas, the CO2, I guess, whatever the gas is in the lager, builds up around the tomato and kind of carries it to the top, and then they just seem to fall away, and it sinks to the bottom again, and the process starts all over again. And yeah, it's quite fascinating. So, but yeah, we're not here to talk about lager lamps or lava lamps. But maybe, John, I didn't give you an opportunity to talk about your lava lamp. Do you want to tell us about your lava lamp, or have I just ruined that for you completely?
No, you're fine. It's still sitting there warming up because it's brand new, so it's going to take a while. Schlepped it up to the Science Museum with my eldest yesterday, and I wanted one as a kid and I was told I could never have one. So the great thing about being an adult is I have adult money and I can buy what I like now.
Are you going to let your kids have one?
God, no.
You ever been a proud owner of a lava lamp, Martyn?
Yeah, I did get one when I think I was a teenager, but they're dangerous though because they get so warm.
They do get very hot.
Yeah,
that's the advantage of the lager lamp. It stays nice and cold. So just got to be careful you don't knock it over. Yeah. So anyway, we digress into the world of lamps. But actually, if you're a regular listener,
I need the lighting.
Lighting is very important, especially for a podcaster, as we know. But let's get back on track. So, as you know, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, every week I collate a list of AWS news, which I share via my AWS News Roundup newsletter. And John and I pick a subset of the articles from the newsletter that we'd like to talk about with our guests on the podcast. So we've got a subset of articles this week, and the first one is from our friends over at InfoQ, and it's about a new feature called AWS Console to Code, generating code for console actions. Now, this sounds great for somebody like me because, as we all know, I'm a fairly light user of AWS. I'm more of a console jockey than I am a script kiddie. So the fact that I can now record my console actions and turn that into infrastructure as code sounds quite interesting. But is it?
Yes. Yeah. What this reminded me of, and I may have said this on the pod or not, but in a past life, for my sins, I was a tester. And this is going to show my age now. In my university degree, I took a year out to go and work for Debenhams. This is, I was very young, and the company doesn't exist anymore, but there we go. And one of the things I did when I was there was automation, and recording automation scripts using QTP and Selenium and this, that, and the other, and that was all great fun. And it reminded me quite a lot of that. With that, what you do is you'd click the record button, and you'd go off and run the test that you wanted to run, and it would say, "Yeah, okay, I've captured all of those actions. You've clicked up here, and you've clicked over there, and so on and so on." And then that would be the basis of your test, and you go and enhance it. So you could say, "Okay, when I'm on this page, validate that this string appears, this image is there, this is in the right place," that kind of thing. And this reminded me an awful lot of that. It's just on always, rather than the QTP thing where you turn it on. This is just on and running in the console. And it will come out with a whole bunch of, we think you've done this, we think you've done that, we think you've done the third thing. Is that correct? Yes, no. Go and pick the thing that you're interested in, and it tells you, okay, so you did this, you made an EC2, and you gave it some EBS and some network and so on and so on. and here's a script that tells you how to do it. Here's infrastructure code that shows you how to do it. And you can go and embellish it from there so that you can say, well, yes, I did do this, but I want to be able to parameterize it so that I don't have to give it an elastic IP, for instance. And you can kind of play with it from there. So yeah, it's cool. It's really cool if you're, like you say, a console jockey and you're not used to just going from scripts and going from IAC as a starting point. It's also quite handy, and it's I don't know if it's doing this directly or not, but it's handy in the world where you can take existing infrastructure, play with it, and then start to get IAC from it. So I don't know if it's this or if it's another tool that I've seen recently. It might be another thing, and we'll probably talk about it next week. But it's here's a load of things, give me IAC. Brilliant. More of that, because we certainly come across a lot of customer deployments where it's been built by hand because it's been built by an app dev who didn't know Terraform or CloudFormation or whatever. So the ability to take that way of working and codify it is brilliant.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this one, Martyn?
It was the same. I mean, the article is interesting because the last point on it was saying it's only in EC2 at the moment. And one of the quotes was, I created an EC2 instance with all default settings and it didn't work. So it's hard to say how good, but I think the premise is great. I mean, ClickOps, as much as like we shouldn't be doing it, everyone is doing it. Especially we've had clients who've come to us and said, we've got this thing set up. It's been set up over years by loads of random people. And like it's in a single AWS account, for example. And we have to, okay, we want to turn that into a correct AWS strategy. You've got to go in and then, but at that point, it's already built. So a tool like this, I guess it only starts working from when it was released. And I think then that goes into, and that's where the overlap happens with the other stuff that you just mentioned, John, which is more about
I forget the name of
your
it,
account.
Yeah.
You know, so well, they've released two. I think there was like a CDK one, CDK Migrate, and there's some sort of thing built into CloudFormation. But it's sort of like hunting through your account, looking for resources, and then turning them into IAC, where this is watching what you're doing, and then using Gen AI to turn that into IAC. So I'm not quite sure why you would need both in that instance, because if you've already created it, you could use the other tool. So it could just be a two-pizza Amazon thing where they've both done the same thing, or it could be I'm missing exactly.
Feels like a double development attack, pincer move. It feels like you've already done it, so let's hoover that up from this angle. And we know that you don't know how to do it, so let's hoover that up from that angle. And that way, no matter whether you're trying to convert existing stuff or whether you're building new, but badly, you can come in from the other angle and you get some IAC that you can then deploy to production, for instance. Although I wouldn't say any of it was production ready right now because they're all in preview.
Yeah, like the CDK Migrate, I think generates really raw CDK. So it's not using the level 2 constructs and stuff. So I guess it's the same with the rest. It's a great place to start though.
I suppose it could be quicker doing it this way because you've not got any process to run after you've created the resources. Whereas with the other approach, it's kind of
maybe
for new stuff. For new stuff, there's no process to run after you've created the resources in the console.
I mean, here's the rub. I wouldn't trust the tool, either of them, to run, their outputs directly. I wouldn't trust them. In the same way that with an automation test, you don't go, great, that's my test, I've just recorded it. You go, you look at the code, you embellish it, you put your checks in place, and so on and so on. So I wouldn't trust it out of the box, but maybe it's a way of new people getting there faster.
I think it's just in general is trying to get what's in an account as well. If somebody says, here's an AWS account and you log in, it's actually quite hard to figure out what's in there. You can look at billing, you can look at Resource Explorer and things like this, but it can actually be quite difficult to diagram it all up, as it were. So if you can generate a template, and then you could probably put that into another tool to turn that into a diagram, maybe. It might be a good way just to do that, just to figure out what's in there.
Yeah, there's lots of tools available for doing kind of inventories and diagrams and things like that. But yeah, I'm not sure there's any one tool to rule them all that kind of gives the kind of ultimate output. I noticed that you said it's limited to EC2 and it's only available in the North Virginia region. Is that because that's where the console is hosted, or is it literally you can only do EC2s in North Virginia?
A bit of both, I think. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of global services are actually hosted in North Virginia. When you start getting under the covers and start turning things off, you can't turn off North Virginia. Well, you can, but you really shouldn't, because metrics start not working and billing starts misbehaving and all that sort of things. You do need to leave that one on. I suspect, though, it's gone into North Virginia because that's probably where the console lives, and it's the region that gets all the new stuff first when it's not a multi-region release.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it certainly sounds cool. But as I say, proceed with caution. As with a lot of these generative AI tools, don't necessarily just trust the output. It just gives you a starting point to jump off from. But it is only in preview, so I'd be interested to see how this develops over time as more features and more services are added. So let's skip on to the next article for this week. And this one is all about ECS, Amazon Elastic Container Service. So the article goes on to describe what ECS is, what it does, and then gives 5 use cases of how ECS could be relevant in various different DevOps scenarios. So, Martyn, I'll come to you first on this one. Are you a fan of ECS?
I'm mixed. We don't. As a tool, it is actually really good, and I much prefer to use it, especially with Fargate, than I would to try and use Kubernetes. Or do something in another way. If I'm going to do containers, I believe AppRunner uses Fargate under the hood, so AppRunner is typically quite easy to get going as well. But I've always found the console and the terminology and stuff really difficult, for beginners. Like, it's quite hard to get up and running.
It's Kubernetes inspired, and they've used all the same terms.
Yeah,
It's much easier than Kubernetes, but we're going to call it very similar things. So what's the difference between a service, a daemon, a task? You just kind of have to know.
Yeah. I mean, once you get over that hurdle, it's fine. But my first intro to ECS, I think, was probably a game day years ago. And it was like, oh, you've got this thing running ECS. Can you set up auto scaling or something like that on it? That was not easy to figure out without having known beforehand how to do it. You'd think it would just be clicking some stuff to turn on auto scaling, but it wasn't. So I think it's good as a product. Definitely just has that learning curve to get going, though.
John?
What about ECS generally? My opinion is a bit well known. Kubernetes can get in the bin, and if you need to run containers, use ECS, unless you're already running Kubernetes. But that's not why I picked this one out. I picked it out because the use cases are reasonable. They're valid. It's, leveraging ECS for your pipelines. It says, well, it can integrate ECS with code pipeline. Okay, but code build just runs containers anyway, so meh, whatever. I think who cares? Scaling microservices. Yep, brilliant. Like that. Consistent deployment environments. Good, we like that too. Building environments for fresh deployments and trashing old ones and having the same environment between different the same environment between dev and staging production, kind of all the rest of it. That's great. That's brilliant. We like that. It's a lot easier to do in a containerized environment because that's kind of the point. And it goes about automated scaling, and yes, you can do that, and then centralized logging, and yes, that's all brilliant too. But I don't like the term DevOps use case. Like, why is no? I don't like the term DevOps generally, to be honest, but it's sort of something that the industry has latched onto as you're a DevOps engineer. No, but okay. I just didn't like the presentation of it. The use cases themselves are great, but they're not DevOps use cases. They're just use cases. It feels like they've gone to some sort of SEO person and gone, here's a magnet, here's a big keyword we can link into and get into people's lists and then get talked about. Which is, of course, exactly what we're doing.
Clickbait. This article's about DevOps. I must read it because DevOps is a buzzword.
Yeah. I mean, the use cases themselves are useful. They're valid. They are. Leveraging it for your pipelines. That's okay. Fine. You can use it within code pipeline, but you can use code build within code pipeline. So I don't get why you would. personally. Unless there's something specific you need to do in ECS as part of your process, but then you'd be using ECS for your container orchestration anyway, so neither here nor there. The microservice scaling, yeah, great, and it integrates directly with things like RDS and DynamoDB, so it just kind of everything scales, which is brilliant, and we like that. I've talked about the others as well to an extent. The consistent logging is a fun one, because it's not like that's not something that ECS does out of the box. You have to tell it to do that. So I think that's a little bit generous, calling it a use case of ECS that you want centralized logging, because you have to tell the service or task definition that you want to log to CloudWatch or to whatever service. Otherwise, it will just dump logs on your machines, because that's what Docker does by default. So I think that one was a bit generous, but yeah.
It does say by integrating with CloudWatch, so I don't think it's... Perhaps the title is misleading, but yeah,
because you're not using ECS for centralized logging. You're centralizing your logs from ECS. So it's like, okay.
Slightly misleading, yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week, which is an article on Security Boulevard about how Datadog, a recent Datadog report has surfaced a pair of sophisticated AWS attacks. So we've been talking about attacks this morning, phishing and the like. So let's talk about this one. What are your thoughts on this one, John?
Sophisticated is a bit generous. They don't actually talk about the attack process. They just talk about what they've done once they've gained access to your account. And what do you think they've done? They've mined crypto. It's just that no one does anything interesting anymore. They just see if they can use your money to mine crypto. Cool. Okay. And what do? They put them in regions that you're not using. Brilliant. Again, that's not sophisticated. That's not new. Maybe it is new and sophisticated, but we've seen it 3 or 4 times now. And it's just, okay, great. Moving on. I think the point, I think, is that historically, the people that we've seen doing this sort of thing don't use scripting tools. They don't use IAC. What they've been doing is they've been doing it in the console because they've managed to break into your account in the console, and they've kind of done it that way. Now they've there's a thing here saying that within 2 minutes they've managed to deploy to 25 tasks to 17 different regions, something like that. Like, okay, so they've actually decided to, ironically, use proper processes when they're mining crypto on your dollar, but fine. It's again, calling it sophisticated, I think, is generous. All they're now doing is they're leveraging automation where they kind of weren't before, and it doesn't say how they've broken into the accounts, because again, I don't think that anything sophisticated was done there. It's just going to be a leaked credential, because that's 90% of what it is. What's very important, though, and what this article does do, credit to it, is it says that in general, cloud infrastructure is more secure than on-premises, which is true. That's fair. Generally speaking, it's more secure because shared responsibility. You don't have to worry about where the data centers are. AWS handle all of that. Security of the cloud they handle. Security in the cloud you handle. And they give you really good tools to help you with that as well, through things like VPCs and security groups, and then the tools to detect that you've done something silly, detective, guard duty, Macy, yada, yada, yada. So it's important to note that just because this is a cloud attack, that's just because there's so much running in the cloud. Now, the attack vector is that much bigger because there's just that much more to go off and hit. But again, calling it a sophisticated pair of attacks is generous, I think.
It's ironic that they've got good DevOps.
Maybe they used console to code to do it.
And actually, the accounts they're attacking probably have quite poor processes, and therefore, have leaked their details. I had the same thought when I read it. I was like, oh, I'm looking forward to this sophisticated AWS account attacks. What they're going to tell me about some new kind of, I don't know, day zero sort of thing. No, they just like right at the end say, yeah, they probably left their details on GitHub or something like that, So I think obviously with all of the cloud, like everyone seems to there seems to be a general worry when people start using the cloud that it's on the internet, therefore it's not as secure. and all the attacks always usually come back to it's you're doing it wrong. It's not actually a problem with the cloud. You're just doing an IAM route, give everyone IAM routes, and then you started, and then obviously it gets leaked because you don't change your key for 4 years. And
I saw one the other day that had been live, had an access key that had been live for 1,700 days.
Yeah, I've seen a couple like that. And that's like no MFA with an access key that's been there for thousands of days. And you're like, how has it not been attacked? It's quite, I mean, there should be a push in general that all accounts should lock down regions. Like you should, when you get a brand new account, have to activate each region. And I know
Well, you do to an extent. You do to an extent. There's, I think, 10 regions or so that you have to explicitly turn on. Some of the more odd ones, Stockholm, Cape Town, that kind of thing. You have to turn them on specifically. A lot of the China regions you have to turn on. But it would be good. I appreciate that things run in North Virginia to an extent, but it would be good to say, I only want these ones, please. So I want to turn on London and Ireland and North Virginia, and that'll do. Thank you very much. And that's something that we do with our clients, but it's a bit jury-rigged through IAM and SCPs. Yeah. So you just basically block anything that's not a global service. So there's about 10 or 15 services that you can't block. And if you start blocking, S3 is one of them. If you block S3 within a region, you then can't use the global endpoint. You have to use the regional endpoints in the regions you got it turned on. So you've got to exclude S3 as well, which is like, that's really annoying. But by the by. But that's done a bit hacky through an SCP. It would be really nice to be able to just go off, and just have, like, I want these 3. Thanks very much.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the cases, like, you should, I mean, they do it with Lambda, don't they, now, where you get really limited access to Lambda on new accounts. But even an account's been there for years, the account might never have used ECS, and suddenly you're allowed to deploy around the world in 2 minutes and no alarms get set off. Obviously, yes, you can turn on guard duty, and they should do, but these are accounts where people probably don't know about guard duty. So.
There's a little bit of an unkind line in the last paragraph saying, provisioned by app developers with little to no appreciation for cybersecurity best practices. There's a little bit unkind, I think. I wouldn't say it's untrue, but it's certainly an unkind statement. But a lot of AWS accounts, and again, this is what we see from our customer base, is certainly provisioned to begin with by an app dev who's just gone, okay, I kind of know what I'm doing, we'll set it all up. Because, I mean, I'm a cloud engineer, I'm a DevOps engineer, I've been a platform engineer, I've been an SRE, I've been, a whole bunch. I'm not the first hire in the door, unless it's a consultancy for doing exactly that. We are not the first people that get hired because our skill set is not the thing that's moving the needle on product. It's not. So these things, by and large, will get set up by someone that kind of knows it, and in truth, they know enough to get themselves in trouble.
Yeah, 100%. Like every application I've come across on sort of a new, we've come in to look at, there's IAM sort of access keys directly in the code deployed to Lambda or something, like not using secrets manager and not doing all the things that you should do, because that works. Like, it gets you going really quickly, and you can't argue that.
We'll fix all of that later.
Yeah, exactly. And then you fix it when it's a problem. Like,
yeah, it's the pressure to deliver that MVP. It's only an MVP. We'll fix all that other stuff later, and then it never gets fixed, or perhaps things get forgotten about. That need to be fixed. Yeah.
Well, no one's going to own up to hard coding credentials into a code base. No one's going to own up to that. So you come across it by accident and think, okay, I don't even care who did it. I just need to fix it now.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Perhaps not as sophisticated as the article may have made out, but
we're a bit clickbaity this week. We're a bit clickbaity. It's DevOps use cases, and which were just kind of generic platform engineering use cases, and it's sophisticated attacks that are not.
I guess it's just the automation that's sophisticated, which perhaps is not that sophisticated to you because you live with it day in, day out, but certainly more sophisticated than the phishing attempt that I got yesterday via Facebook Marketplace, attempted to harvest my PayPal credentials. It was incredibly obvious. And
is it more or less sophisticated than my lava lamp that's warm enough that it's just started moving around now?
Where's the tomato? Oh, sorry, I'm getting confused. Anyway,
It's 11:15 in the morning. You've got problems.
on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week, which is about changes to the AWS Certification program. So there's a number of specialty certs that are being retired, and some new certs coming out. So I guess always have to mention the gold jacket when we're talking about certs. Does this make it easier to get the gold jacket now that they've retired? Because I think there's more being retired than there are being created. So perhaps less to do now to get the gold jacket. Are you going for the gold jacket, Martyn?
I mean, technically, I have it in that I've got all 12, but I didn't get given the jacket because it's almost impossible to get the jacket.
Yeah, there's two ways of getting the jacket. One of them is work for AWS, and the other is be an ambassador. Oh, not counting. And be an ambassador and go to the ambassadors thing in Seattle and just know the right person. That's the only other place they give them out. Yes, but you've also got to go to Seattle for the ambassadors conference, which is not at the same time as reInvent, I think.
Yeah, it's a couple of days 2 months before. So I was told at reInvent that, sorry, we can't give it you here. You'd have to come to the thing next year. I was like, well, I did this search like a year ago now. I'm over it. But yeah, I mean, it's now, so there's currently 12. They're just the data engineer associate one is just being released. So there'd be technically 13. But then the data analytics database and SAP being retired means that it's dropping back down to 10. But there is rumors of 2 or 3 more coming in by the end of the year. Might be another 2. So be quick if you get the jacket.
Yeah, I think what this is showing really is because you care about jackets and things, Carl. It's so chinty, it's awful. I think what this is showing though is here we go. How much did you pay for the shipping on that? That was just offensive.
We don't talk about that.
What this is showing is that AWS are still prescient of needs of the market for demonstrating skills, and database specialty, okay, it's kind of neither here nor there. I don't know how you can specialize in databases particularly. I knew a guy that was a certified Microsoft SQL master, like one of about 30 in the world or something like that, and he knew his stuff. He absolutely knew what he was going on about, but it was a very niche skill set. Database specialty, I've never looked at it, but I imagine it's the same sort of categories. You know databases inside out and upside down and all the rest of it. That's brilliant. I don't spend enough time with them to care. SAP, who cares? Who cares? And then the data analytics specialty is clearly being replaced by the, what are they calling it? Data engineer associate, which I would, given that it's a new associate, I would expect a pro cert to come at some point in the same area. Because the 3 associate certs you've got at the minute, solutions architect has a pro cert, and then dev and sysops both roll up under the DevOps pro cert. Having done that one, you can see where bits have come from one and bits have come from the other. So there's clearly a path where they roll up under it. I would imagine that there will be a data engineer pro cert coming in that vein.
It feels like it. So I was speaking at reInvent to one of the certification people, because I've done writing questions for some of the exams before, and she was saying like the specialties, they're sort of trying to get away from them a little bit and into more associates and professionals. But it seems like the data analytics specialty has been replaced by this new associate, and they weren't aiming for a new professional, but now they're getting rid of the database one as well. It feels like that. There are rumors of a Gen AI one, but I asked and they wouldn't tell me. So I can't say whether that's true or not, but somebody's convinced there is. I don't know how true it is. So all I've been told is that there's probably going to be 2 or 3 by the end of the year, new ones. But like of the 2 or 3 they're thinking about, only 1 or 2 might get signed off. Definitely SAP was a waste. The Alexa one was a bit of a waste. They're trying to get away from that sort of thing, I think. So yeah, we'll see. The data engineer one wasn't that easy. I did the beta exam thing was like more complicated than I expected. So I think it's, as an associate, like it's actually quite specialized. So maybe we'll get more of that sort of thing, like in a associate ML type thing.
If I was a gambling man, I'd put my money on a Gen AI cert coming out at some point. What with all the hype around AI, there's got to be an AI cert.
It'll be just Bedrock. Like, what else?
There's a whole bunch of other AI tools that AWS have that work in the same sort of way, because there's transcribed and textract and all of the recognition stuff, which I've used quite a lot and I'm quite a fan of. It's not cheap, but it's really good for, I want to do some image recognition. Okay, there you go. And you pay like 2 cents per 1,000 or something. So at scale, it's expensive, but for an MVP, it's brilliant. So yeah, it would be, I would expect an AI, Gen AI type thing to come out, because there's a lot of other services and they're not really spoken about on the other associate certs.
The ML specialty touches on them, but the ML specialty is a weird one because 50% of that cert is ML and 50% is AWS ML. And ML is boring now; it's all Gen AI now. It doesn't use ML in any way. It's rebrand it. That's it. Done.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll rehash that cert and we won't see a dedicated Gen AI one. Anyway, conscious of time, let's skip on to the final article for this week. Of course, it was quarterly earnings time last week. So if you do follow the IT press, you won't have missed the plethora of articles about quarterly results for all the big cloud providers. This particular one was just one from CNBC. Putting a positive spin on AWS's growth rate, which has increased by a percentage point versus quarter on quarter last year. So the growth has accelerated. There's plenty of other articles putting a negative spin on it, showing how the other cloud providers are actually growing much faster than AWS. But of course, AWS is still far and away the market leader in terms of overall spend. So what are your thoughts on these results, guys?
I thought you'd like to look at a big number, Carl.
I love looking at big numbers. Yeah, this is, but this one's 13, so it's unlucky for some. But I think it's great to see.
I found it quite interesting that AWS was 14% of Amazon's as a whole's overall revenue, and there was another one where it said it was 54% of their operating income, and I'm not quite sure of the difference between that, but. It's not EBITDA. Is it EBITDA? I'm not quite sure.
It's a profit measure. I don't know exactly what measure of profit it is, but yeah, basically what it's saying is what was it, 12% of revenue and 54% of profit. So AWS is definitely generating the vast majority of the profits for Amazon Inc.
Yeah, I mean Amazon runs on AWS. So I'm always surprised when AWS is only such a small percentage of Amazon.
Well, it's a revenue thing, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
In retail, again, teenager, worked in retail, the amount of money that's moving through on a 5% margin is just obscene. Like you look at an average supermarket in the UK and they're moving hundreds of thousands of pounds a day on 4%. Okay.
Yeah. I think the growth's interesting because the others are going to grow quicker because they're smaller. Like percentage-wise, they've got a lot to catch up on. But then Amazon's going to struggle in that sense just because AWS is just because it's so big. It's already it's got percentage-wise, it's quite tricky to get bigger. But there was one quote in there from I think it was Adam. I can't remember. It was one of the AWS sort of top dogs, and he was saying about that they are still getting quite a lot of modernization, like people moving to the cloud and things like that. It's not just an increase of people using more cloud because they're getting bigger. But it's quite interesting because the other, especially Google, still can't quite understand Google Cloud. Like it seems niche. Like we've had a customer who had to quickly leave because they got rid of their IoT product. Like, how can you trust a cloud product if it's closing down products inside it? Like, I'd be quite suspicious of it. Azure makes sense. There's a lot of Microsoft.
Apart from all the security holes.
Well,
it's got more holes than a sieve.
Yeah. Ironic, we've just been talking about security issues in AWS.
Yeah, I think the Google and Microsoft figures also include Microsoft 365 and workspaces. So
Yes.
I think it's often not a fair comparison because AWS is not active in that market. And
Even though
I think
AWS has workspaces, but that's not the same because that's an email provision.
it's VDI rather than
Email.
the sort of productivity suite. So
But yeah, it's definitely not an apples to apples comparison, not by a long way. And maybe this is part of Amazon's problem in that they are an infrastructure player. That's what they are. They might have all these other nice tools when they talk about not having to provision infrastructure for serverless and all the rest of it, and that's great. And I like that, but it's still they're the plumbing per se.
Yeah. But as I say, great to see that growth starting to increase again, and certainly shows that the sector is not stagnating. But I'm very conscious of time. We have reached the end of our time today for Season 3, Episode 6 of Logicast. So thank you, John, for your insights, and thank you, Martyn, for agreeing to come on as a guest again. Great to hear your insights. Great to have you back. So that's all for us for this week. Don't forget, you can download us wherever you download your podcasts. And if you want to see what we look like when we're talking to you, we're also on YouTube. So that was Season 3, Episode 6 of Logicast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next time.